Hello, hello. Welcome back, everybody. So, this is Lance Independent, and we are continuing the quest of reviewing every single video on meta ethics on the entire internet, every podcast, every TikTok, all of it. We're going to review all of it. When we're done with that, then we're going to review our reviews. We're going to have meta reviews. Then we finish those. You know what's going to happen. Meta reviews. So, how y'all doing? What's up? Welcome, everybody. Let's see who we got here. All right, we got Surf on Earth. You are here for the 1,000 Lance loot. Jonah gets 500 and PKD for 250. Mason, what's up? You're a little bit late, and so are you, Jonah. So welcome, everybody. Let's get started. And there will be no delay. I'm going to take like 15 minutes to get into it, but we'll see. I'm at 1 minute, so that's pretty good. All right, let's get into it right away. Let me know if there are any audio issues or anything like that, please, in the chat, and I'll make some adjustments. Oh, let me bump my volume up just a wee bit. And we are ready to go. All right.
So anytime I get into a subject like this, I'm always reminded by folks in the comment section that I'm not a theologian, I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a scientist, and thus I'm not qualified to discuss these sorts of matters. And it's true that I am none of those things. However, I do reject the idea that you have to be a specialist in order to think about and talk about the deeper questions in life. I think that's a very sad way to view life and to go about life. You know, to view it as something that can only be discussed by highly qualified academics, and the rest of us just have to sort of walk about our merry way and never think about these things. That's not how I see it. I think that even normal people like myself and you can and should have these discussions.
So first thing is, I completely agree with that. So you do have people that will question your credentials. They'll throw all this gatekeeping crap at you if you try to opine on certain sorts of topics. Now, it is frustrating when people go around that are very ignorant and unfamiliar with the topic, and they're super confident and they're really obnoxious about it, and they think they're carving some sort of vigilante path. They're some kind of trailblazer, revolutionary on some topic, and they don't know what they're talking about. That could be very frustrating. Then again, it could be equally frustrating, if not more so, when a specialist is an overconfident, pompous moron who doesn't understand the topic either, but they can wave a diploma in your face and convince themselves and others that they do know what they're talking about. A diploma and credentials are no guarantee that you are actually an expert or that you know what you're talking about, nor is being a non-specialist a guarantee that you don't know what you're talking about. What people should do is treat credentials as a heuristic. They are something to respect to a degree. They are something to appreciate to a degree as an indicator of a person's greater likelihood of being competent in the topic, but they should not be taken as some sort of token of permission to speak on a topic where nobody else is permitted to speak on the topic. They should not be taken to be some sort of barrier to entry for someone to be able to talk about a particular topic. Now, there are certain contexts where I would be a lot more hesitant to make that sort of claim. If people are offering medical advice and they don't have medical training or expertise, that's going to make me be very wary. And there's other sorts of like legal advice. Probably not a good idea to take a whole lot of legal advice from someone that isn't qualified. It doesn't have the appropriate legal training. So there are certain sorts of professional contexts where I would be much more inclined to say, I really want the person to have some sort of professional training. Engineering would be an example. But even then, it's possible that a person could have a wealth of experience and they don't actually have a degree, and they know what they're talking about and they know what they're doing. Again, these should be treated as heuristics, as rules of thumb, not as some sort of absolute indicator of who is or isn't qualified to talk about a topic. And when it comes to philosophical topics, I certainly think that autodidactism, studying on your own and expressing and developing a position without formal training is especially appropriate and acceptable for philosophical topics. I see no problem with that at all. So I just agree with the first thing. I'd seen, I don't know how much of this I listened to. I listened to at least the first 8-10 minutes. And so, look, if I agree with somebody that I typically am going to disagree with them about most other things, why not acknowledge that? There's no problem with that. So yeah, you do get these people that will kind of throw credentials at you. And I say this for people that don't know, as someone that has quite a bit of credentials. I mean, I've 4 college degrees. So I mean, so it's not like I'm saying this because I'm like, oh, people should take me seriously, even though I don't have the credentials. I got them, but it's credentials are something you earn by developing competence in the topic. It's the competence that matters, not the credentials themselves. All right, let's see what people have to say here. Oh, wow, a lot of comments already. All right. As Ekman says, I say hi to the final boss of moral anti-realism. It'd be cool to be the final boss. Don't know about that. Didn't we already review this? No, we reviewed episode 97, and then I discovered there was an earlier episode 96. Unless I'm wrong and I reviewed this video and not the other, and then we're reviewing the same video twice, which would be really funny. You might think it's the same video because he's sitting in a car and looks similar in both, but you're welcome to go back and find my old one. In fact, let me do that just to make sure that I'm not reviewing the same video twice. That would be really hilarious. Let's see. Where is it? It was earlier in the year, or maybe at the end of last year. It's the one with the dolls in the picture. Oh, wow. I went way too far back. Where is that? Here it is. Yep, that says 97. And this is episode 96, as you can see at the top. So yeah, that was the episode after this. All right. Jonah says, I agree with anti-credentialism and philosophy in principle, but for right-wing ideologues like Walsh, it's usually indicative of a broader and more dangerous brand of anti-intellectualism. That may be true, but the general point about, having the ability to opine on a philosophical matter, I think that point stands in either case. Flame says, one time Lance Bush reacted to a 6-minute video in 2 hours. It was really astounding to observe such such levels of intelligence. That might be levels of obsessive. I don't know, obsessiveness. I don't know that that's really an indicator of me being especially intelligent. It's life giving me a lemon and me making a tub of lemonade and then jumping into it, which is probably not a good idea. It was the stupidest analogy I think I've ever given, but I stand by it. Jimothy says, I swear that he said the exact same thing in the last one about credentials. Maybe he did. I don't know. Okay. So let's keep going.
I've always thought that 2 of the best arguments for the existence of God are these: the argument from consciousness and the argument from morality. Now, I don't know if they are the best. To me, they're the best. They are, to me, the most compelling. So they're so compelling that even if every other argument for God was disproven, which wouldn't happen, but even if it did happen, I would still think that a belief in God is the most rational thing based on these 2 arguments. Now,
so consciousness and moral realism, those are presumably there's some sort of, I mean, you could rely on a deductive argument, you could make an abductive argument, but it could be something like these wouldn't be possible without God's existence. You might get some kind of deductive argument like that. Or it could be that the best explanation available for consciousness and for moral realism, like the fact that there are stance independent moral facts, is that God exists. And then you have some kind of abductive argument. I find it rather wild to claim that these 2 are so powerful all on their own that they independently are compelling arguments for the existence of God. But all right, let's see what he has to say about it.
I'm not going to get into the whole argument from consciousness thing. It's I think it's familiar enough to
one thing I will say is he does get into it.
most people who've thought about these matters. In essence, if God does not exist, then only physical matter and physical processes exist.
I don't think that's any sort of argument from consciousness that most people that know what they're talking about would endorse on the matter. So here he's saying if God doesn't exist, then all you've got is only physical matter. That's just not true. Let's hear that again.
Who've thought about these matters. In essence, if God does not exist, then only physical matter and physical processes exist.
So that's not true, and most philosophers wouldn't accept that as true. And look, I'll be one of the first. I have the longest blog series ever. It's like 9 parts. It's called the Phil Papers fallacy. And I critique over reliance on philosophical consensus. I myself frequently go against philosophical consensus. But this is a case where I would not. And I wouldn't because it simply does not follow from the fact that God doesn't exist, that the only thing that exists is physical stuff. That doesn't follow at all. There are a variety of metaphysical positions about what sorts of things exist or don't exist that is consistent with the non-existence of God. You could still have substance dualism. You could have panpsychism. You could have physicalism. You could have anomalous monism. You could have a variety of positions. I myself am an atheist, and I don't endorse physicalism. I know that upsets some physicalists. Now, generally speaking, my positions tend to operate in practice quite a lot like naturalists and physicalists, but I'm not a naturalist physicalist. I actually think that those positions go too far. I think that they have too many metaphysical commitments. But it simply does not follow from the fact that God does, if God didn't exist, that there would only be physical stuff. This isn't going to be part of a good case for some sort of appeal to consciousness as an argument for God. It's overstating the case with a weird claim like, if God doesn't exist, then only physical stuff exists. Nah. I mean, what would the argument for that be?
Only the physical world exists. But if that's the case, how could matter, by chance, without design, without intention, assemble itself in such a way as to create consciousness? How do you get love from?
So this is not going to be any sort of good argument. It sounds like an appeal to ignorance. Like, how could it happen? Well, let's say we don't know. That doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. So what is the argument here? I don't know how consciousness could have arisen from purely physical matter. Therefore, God has to exist. I mean, one, you could think that consciousness didn't. I mean, there's a number of things you could think. One, you'd have to get clear on what he means by consciousness. If he means phenomenal consciousness, one position is that phenomenal consciousness doesn't exist, and therefore there isn't anything in particular that the physicalist or the non-theist would need to explain. So that's one position. Another is that, okay, so we do need some kind of non-physicalist account to account for consciousness, and we have one, but it doesn't entail or imply theism. So that's another option. It's not so obvious why theism is going to be the best explanation for the existence of consciousness. And in this case, you're going to have a variety of fairly mundane naturalistic explanations for what's going on. I mean, maybe a lot of people wouldn't find them so mundane, but I mean mundane in the sense that they don't require drawing on any wonky metaphysics, certainly not anything theological, like supernatural, I should say theological. You're not going to need anything theistic to account for consciousness. And I don't know of too many people that would think that you do. Now, there are people that appeal to like the psychophysical harmony and that sort of thing. And they think that the best explanation for certain sorts of phenomena associated with consciousness might be theism. So maybe you get some sort of abductive argument, but he's not structuring or presenting it in that sort of way here. And there's going to be problems with that. I've critiqued the psychophysical harmony on my blog rather extensively. And I've seen other people critique it. I don't think that those arguments are particularly compelling, but at least they're structured in the form of something other than something like, if God doesn't exist, only physical stuff exists. And how could consciousness arise out of that? That's not a good argument. It's barely an argument.
Dust. Even
we have a couple other things in there. Take a look at a couple things he said.
Physical matter and physical processes exist. Only the physical world exists. But if that's the case, how could matter, by chance?
So you have this problem, by chance. So I mean, look, I'm not the evolution and natural selection channel, but I don't know where theists or Christians that are anti-evolution and generally anti these like scientific accounts of various sorts of phenomena like consciousness got the idea that organisms like humans arose by chance. I mean, what exactly did they mean by that? So if you mean that they're like contingent and that things could have like there could be counterfactuals or things went very differently, then that's certainly true. But sure, I mean that's not any sort of threat to complex phenomena like consciousness arising. But if they mean that it was like luck processes, like you'll see people say, how could the eye have spontaneously arose by chance, or how could the complexity of life arise by chance? Uh, if we're referring to evolution, it's not a chance process. It may very well be that mutations are a chance process, but which mutations are conserved because they enhance reproductive fitness is pretty much the opposite of a chance process. It's not chance that the organism with whatever is enhancing its reproductive fitness, better wings, better claws, better metabolism, better immune system. The ones that have that advantage in reproductive fitness, that leave behind more offspring, they don't do so by chance. It's not luck. So this idea that we became what we are by chance is simply not true. I don't know why people repeat this over and over and over and over like a mantra. It's honestly, it's very ill-informed about what people that take evolutionary approaches to things think, which it's worth pointing out. These sorts of processes are consistent with theism. I don't see them as a significant threat to theism. I don't know why Christians and theists are frequently so opposed to these sorts of explanations.
Without design, without intention, assemble itself in such a way as to create consciousness? How do you get?
Yeah, I mean, this seems like a question that we should explore with neuroscience, anthropology, evolutionary theory, cognitive science, linguistics. These would be the fields I would want to exhaust before we turn to more speculative, novel metaphysics to account for what's going on with humans. I don't think anything particularly, things impressive and extraordinary things might be going on, but they're not the sorts of things that could only be accounted for by God. I guess we'll see if he ends up making an argument for this. Let's have a look at the chat. Nathan says, didn't you review this a while back? No, I didn't. So if you go back and check that, that's actually episode 97. This is episode 96. He looks very similar in both episodes. Since several people keep asking, let me just link the previous video so you can see for yourselves. People keep asking me, didn't you review this? No, I didn't. Or did I review both videos? I'm looking through to see if there's ever 96. No, there wasn't. That was the previous one that I reviewed. Right. Where are we at with the other comments? Wow, lots of comments, lots of comments. Yeah, Mason says, no, that doesn't follow. If theism is false, that doesn't mean naturalism is all that's left. Well, he's implying physicalism, not necessarily naturalism. The Chid says, I'm curious about your take on the argument that asserts that even if morality comes from God, the morality would still be subjective. It wouldn't necessarily be. Someone can throw a whole lot of other theological stuff into their view that would give them some kind of realism. So I wouldn't just insist to Christians, no, if you think morality comes from God, then subjectivism. No, it's not that simple. So Lisa, sir, where did time, space, and matter come from? Are you asking me? Jenna says, are you an ontological skeptic of some sort? I'm a pragmatist. That is going to have some implications for what I say about certain metaphysical claims. I don't have a problem saying physical stuff exists, but I don't know why I would hold the view that only physical stuff exists. You'd have to be very clear on what you mean by physical stuff. And my suspicion is that that term physical isn't really doing a lot of work, and that you could just be an empiricist and not really worry about whether everything is one fundamental kind of thing or two fundamental kinds of things. I don't really think reality is made up of fundamental kinds of things. Mason Colbert says he seems to be conflating design arguments and arguments from consciousness. Maybe there might be some overlap between the two. Nathan says, I think they just don't grok the scale of the universe. Maybe not. I don't know. Zachman says, I still have no idea what the actual argument for consciousness is. Well, I don't know exactly what he has in mind. Like, is he talking about psychophysical harmony, or is he talking about some other process or phenomena? I don't know exactly what he's talking about. Yeah, Mason says they're typically Bayesian or abductive arguments that consciousness is more likely in theism than naturalism. Yeah, but I'm not a theist or naturalist, so why would I care about that? All right, let's keep going. Whoops, there.
Love from dust. Even with you start with dust. Even if you add billions and billions of years on top of it, how does it ever become love? What about anger, happiness, empathy, and so on? How does a material thing derived from material and nothing more develop abstract ideas? No other animal can do this. Nothing else on earth can have abstract ideas. Dolphins are very intelligent um, aquatic animals, but even the most intelligent dolphin cannot think about the idea of, say, freedom. Much less can a dolphin desire freedom. Much less can a dolphin look at itself and say, I'm a dolphin, I am me, but I wish I were more than me. A dolphin can't do that.
Well, I'm pretty sure dolphins can't do that, but I'm not that confident they can't do that. Maybe they can. Should we be that confident that no dolphin has ever thought, I want to be more than me? I want to be more than just a dolphin. I don't know. Probably not. So I probably agree with him about that. But, if what exactly is he saying here? Like, hey, humans are unique. Only we contemplate and think about certain things. Yeah. So what? So selective pressures gave rise to cumulative cultural evolution in humans, and only certain, like Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and certain recent hominids, and it didn't in other organisms. So what? So we got certain traits that they didn't. But I don't know that there's anything deeper to it than that.
But if there is no God, then this is kind of the entire story of mankind. Man desiring to be free from himself, to be more than what he is, more than material, right? It's a very sad, terrible story. If there's no God, you have these biological creatures, which are ourselves, that have developed somehow this desire to be more than us.
What is he talking about? We desire to be more than us? I mean, that's very abstract and obscure. And okay, maybe it's sad if we desire things that we can't achieve, but okay. I mean, maybe reality's a little sad. Too bad.
Um, but how could material develop a desire to be more than material? And again, why hasn't any other material developed that desire? Why hasn't any other material developed that capacity? Most of all, how could a totally physical thing originating from stardust become aware of itself? That's the trickiest thing for atheists, I think. They might say that, well, the brain is a computer, and so all the things I mentioned, love, empathy, anger, sadness, so on, are just functions of the fancy computer system that we got in our heads. But of course, there's already a problem with that argument because computers are designed, we should say, by humans who have the capacity to design things like computers because of their consciousness. So an atheist who discounts God by saying, well, the brain is just a computer, might as well discount God by saying, well, the human body is just like a sculpture. Yeah, and find me a sculpture.
This is getting very convoluted, and it's not clear what exactly the argument is here. He's imagining some sort of response that an atheist gives that's very crude. Well, the brain is a computer. I wouldn't say that. Maybe some atheists would. It wouldn't surprise me if they did. I don't know what he's put. Like, where is the argument that consciousness is best explained or only explained by positing the existence of God? I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is someone ask, if physicalism were true, how could there be consciousness? Asking that question is not an argument for God.
Sculpture that sculpted itself. Find me a computer that built itself. But even more to the point, we are aware of ourselves. So it's not just a.
I mean, and this stuff like find me a computer that built itself. It's very weak tea as far as objections go. So if someone is going to use some sort of computer analogy, or they're going to be some kind of functionalist or computationalist, or they're going to take some sort of view that analogizes the brain, if not outright to a computer, then to some sort of thing that executes various sorts of functions or does certain sorts of activities, and that consciousness is as consciousness does, that sort of account. I mean, there's going to be a whole slew of accounts that are going to differ in a variety of ways. You know, just asking like how. I mean, maybe you could go read about some of these things. There are quite a few accounts out there. There are objections to them. People disagree with them. It's an ongoing matter of contention. I consider the matter one to be sufficiently settled in favor of that one of these sorts of accounts is going to be true for the same reason. Like, let's say we didn't know the exact cause of a particular disease. I don't have to know the exact cause of a disease to assume, I think, with confidence and a very well-grounded confidence, that the disease is going to turn out to be a virus or bacteria or fungi or maybe a prion, or it could be some kind of cancer. There are all sorts of mundane natural causes of diseases. I wouldn't go, well, we don't know what the cause is, therefore, demon possession. That is the level of absurdity that you get from people that go, well, this is really hard to explain, therefore God. What we're not seeing is any sort of good argument from consciousness. And this is supposed to be a video about objective morality. And so far, he's spent several minutes talking about consciousness and physicalism, and like emotions. How would we have emotions if physicalism are true? A bunch of just what struck me as a bunch of disorganized incredulity in the face of physicalist accounts of various kinds of natural psychological phenomena. I don't know what to do with that. It's not really an argument. I just saw somebody post something similar a couple of minutes ago. Andrew Moy says, I don't think there's actually a real argument here. Neither do I. I'm not seeing an argument here. I'm seeing someone that is expressing incredulity in the face of physical accounts of consciousness. Not really much to work with there. Mason Colbert says, I always wanted to be a fire wizard. Like, you wanted to be something more. Yeah. For those in the audience, what else do you want to be? You want to be more than just something physical. What do you want to be? I wouldn't want to be a fire wizard. I always thought fire was the lamest element. It's the most straightforwardly offensive element. I think water is cool. Air is cool. But I think of the major elements, I would go with earth. All right. Sully says, bro, if God didn't exist, we'd actually have to figure out what's going on. Yeah, as if God exists. So, like, if God exists, what? Now we can explain consciousness? What's the explanation then? Well, God gave it to us. Like, what? There's still a whole lot of details to work out. I mean, imagine if God gave us cars. Would we just not need mechanics and not need to know how cars worked? Like, we just don't need to know how combustion engines work, or exhaust, or the electrical systems in a car, or anything about oil changes. We don't need to know anything about the internal mechanism, like about how axles work and heat dissipation and friction. We don't need to study any of that. Of course we would. We'd still need to know all that stuff to get cars working, to make new cars, to do, anything car related, to really understand the mechanisms. You could still pose these questions. You could still answer these questions. There's still going to be all the facts that a physicalist about consciousness is going to want to ask, even if consciousness came from God, unless they think that the phenomena in question is outside the realm of what the brain is doing and all that stuff, which I guess many of them are going to think. Okay, well, good luck making a case for that.
Awareness that the atheists have to explain, but self-awareness. How could a clump of dust, however evolved, ever come to know itself as a clump of dust? And why is it that no other form of matter or assemblage of matter has ever developed this ability? And why isn't there any computer world does not know itself as a computer?
Well, we haven't built one yet. Give it a few years.
So if this is a function of a computer system in our heads, then why can't other computers demonstrate the same ability outside of science fiction novels? So that's one argument. I just said I'm not going to get into it, and then I did. The other argument is the argument from morality. And as that argument goes, we know that objective morality exists. And
What? We know objective morality exists. No, we don't. I don't agree. That's a pretty bold way to start one's case for. Of course, it is a premise and a standard argument for the existence of God, like the moral argument. Like moral realism is true. If moralism is true, God exists. So God exists. I mean, it's the argument. I would just say, yeah, reject premise one.
Objective morality cannot exist without a transcendent source. There can be no transcendent source for morality without God, who is that source. Thus, God exists. Now, I think that's a compelling argument, personally.
Okay, why? Of course, he's not here to talk. I'd be happy to talk to him about this. So, Matt Walsh, if you want to reach out, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. It's not going to happen, but happy to do it.
An atheist can go two general directions with that argument. Maybe there are other directions. This is all based on what I've encountered from atheists. It seems to me that an atheist will generally go two directions with that argument. He can argue that objective morality does not exist. Morality is subjective, it's relative. So that's moral relativism, of course.
Yeah. So if you deny moral realism, it does not entail that you're a moral relativist or subjectivist. I don't know what distinction he's drawing between the two, if any.
Or he can argue that objective morality does exist, but it has some other source that isn't God.
It's a little weird that he's like, these are the two general directions he's seen. These are the only moves available if you have a syllogism, because you can deny the first premise or the second premise. So I did do a video where I talked about how technically it would make a whole lot of sense to deny both at the same time, because the way modus ponens works, if both of the premises are false, then the conclusion is going to be true. So it's not going to work. You're going to be stuck with that. I think someone just shared a truth table on this recently. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, I have the truth table for this. Do I have a way to share it? No, because it's not in a browser. Whatever. Go check out my video where I talk about that. I don't remember which video it is. So go watch all my videos and then you'll find it. So yeah, your option is to reject premise one or premise two, obviously. Technically, you don't have to endorse moral realism to reject the claim that you don't like the claim that if God does not exist, then objective moral truth does not exist. You don't have to endorse moral realism to deny that. So he's giving the impression that you would have that like your only options are to be an anti-realist or to be a secular moral realist, but you could just deny that there's some sort of conditional relation between the existence of God and moral realism. So
now here's the interesting thing I've noticed. It seems that modern atheists and secular people are not as likely to be avowed relativists, that is, explicit, pronounced moral relativists. That seems to be kind of not as fashionable among atheists and secular people as it used to be. It's not like it was in the 19th century. What is more common now, what's most common, I think, is a kind of secular objective morality that often expresses itself as a half-baked relativism. It's very confused.
it's a little weird to say expresses itself as a half-baked relativism. That's not very plausible. I don't know what kinds of secular realists he's talking about, but I think he is right to pick up on the temperature and find that a lot of people are going to reject the second premise in the order that he presented them. They're going to reject the relation between. Okay, simple way to put it. They're going to deny that you need God for objective morality rather than to deny that there's objective morality. So I think he's right that a lot of people are moving in that direction. I think it's a mistake for them to move in that direction. I think people should just reject moral realism and have done with it. That nips this argument in the bud fairly straightforwardly, but there are secular moral realists.
So the average person in our culture is very fond of saying things like, "This is my truth," or "Don't impose your morality on me," your morality. Talking about morality as if it's a thing that you can own and you have your very own version of it. Or they'll say, "Just do what makes you happy," those kinds of things. And they'll say this especially when their own actions are challenged or when something that they personally find acceptable. And these very same people will condemn things like racism, rape, slavery, pollution, and do so by appealing very forcefully to some objective standard.
So he's already making a potential mistake here. A lot of people seem to think that if you're a moral relativist, that you can't object to these sorts of things. And that's not true. So when he's talking about cases where people say, "Don't impose your moral standards on me," and that sort of thing, it's not clear what those people have in mind or what they're doing. In some of those cases, those people might be confused, hypocritical, and have self-contradictory views. I'm certainly not going to deny that there are a lot of atheists out there with deeply confused views about moral philosophy and metaethics. On the other hand, it is consistent to object to other people imposing their moral standards on you and to have no problem imposing your moral standards on others and to be a moral relativist or moral anti-realist more generally. That is going to be entirely consistent with appraiser relativism, with error theory, with expressivism, with views like mine, anti-realist quietism. It's going to be totally consistent with those views. Only some sorts of agent relativists are really going to struggle to accommodate this. Maybe some weird constructivist position or something. Oh, right. And generally speaking, a lot of constructivist positions like ideal observer theory are not going to have a problem with imposing their standards on others. So it's just not an inconsistency, technically speaking, to be an anti-realist and to impose your moral standards on others. You would have to have a very specific metaethical and normative philosophical position to be opposed to the imposition of standards on others, and for it to be against your own, to be of a position where you can't impose your standards on others, and nobody can impose their standards on you. That's a very specific sort of position. But generally speaking, if you're, let's say you're an error theorist, well, then you don't think there's any objective moral facts. You think moral language is committed to there being such facts, but there are no such facts. So there's no moral truth. Now, under that view, it's not right or wrong for you to do anything. So you could impose whatever preferences or standards or values you have on other people. You're not doing anything wrong, not morally speaking. So error theory has no problem with this. If you're an expressivist, you're not going to have this issue. If you have my kind of view, you're not going to have an issue with this. And if you're an appraiser relativist, you're not going to have an issue with this. So there are all sorts, and if you're a constructivist, you're not going to have a problem with imposing your standards on others. So he might be describing a kind of naive, hypocritical, confused, I don't know, like a young person that doesn't really understand this stuff. Maybe, who knows? But there are all sorts of ways philosophically to defend an anti-realist perspective on the matter where it's not especially difficult to do so. And they don't struggle with this sort of problem. It's just consistent with being an anti-realist to impose your standards on others and to oppose them to imposing their standards on you.
Condemning the wrongdoer for breaking some kind of moral code that apparently we're all supposed to abide by.
So, the other thing I wanted to point out is he seems to be assuming that people are objecting to other people imposing their standards. And then what? Does that make them relativists somehow? Like, opposing other people imposing their standards on you is not metaethical relativism. That's a normative position. So there would be no inconsistency between saying, hey, don't impose your moral standards on me, that's wrong, and hey, I am going to impose my moral standards on you because mine are objectively correct. That just sounds like a moral realist. So when did the person that says it's wrong to impose your standards on others necessarily express a metaethical position? If that's a normative moral position, that's entirely consistent with being a realist. So it's not very clear what kind of relativism he's talking about. And the other problem I'll point out is sometimes when someone says, hey, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, nobody should do that, they'll assume, like he says here, oh, well, they're saying it in some objective way. Did they say that? Did they say it's objectively wrong for you to do that? Because if they didn't say that, you're not really in a position to presume that the person is a moral realist because they want other people to abide by a particular moral standard. It's consistent with anti-realism to want other people to abide by the same moral standards you abide by. That is a universality of scope. It doesn't mean stance independence. In other words, I can have a preference that everybody not steal, or a preference that everybody not lie. And I could then go around condemning liars and condemning thieves and being opposed and voting for laws that punish people that do this or that thing, of chastising people. That's all consistent with being a relativist and with being an anti-realist. Having the view that there's no stance independent moral facts doesn't prohibit you from taking a moral stance on how other people conduct themselves. How other people conduct themselves is a question of who the moral standards apply to. It's not a question of making them true. So I think he is making a conflation here between the scope of a moral claim, like who the moral claim applies to, and what it is that makes the moral claim true. Moral realism is the view that whether an action is right or wrong does not depend on anybody's preferences, standards, or attitudes. Universalism is the view that the moral standard in question applies to everybody. But a moral standard could apply to everybody relative to a particular person's moral standard. So, for instance, I could be a relativist and I could think nobody anywhere in the universe should steal. And then when people steal anywhere, I could say that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. It's completely consistent with relativism. It's a very common thing for people to mix up universality, or you could say scope, like who a moral standard applies to and what it is that makes the moral standard true, whether it's a stance or it's not a stance. So I think this is just a common misunderstanding that he has here.
So in practice, I would say the average secular person is really neither a moral absolutist nor a relativist, but kind of a mix, which by definition makes them a relativist.
I don't think that that does make them by definition a relativist. So typically speaking, the sort of threshold to be a realist is pretty low. If you think there's a stance independent moral fact, you're a realist. So if anything, that might make them realists. It would be like a kind of hybrid view, but hybrid views would be realist by default, typically speaking. So I don't think he's right about that either.
Yet few people seem to want to embrace moral relativism, either a moral absolutist Dawkins does, which is a consistent, morally relativistic position to hold, even though it's also horrifying. Most secular people, it seems, don't go that far. They try to maintain the appearances, at least, of an objective morality, even if they abandon the objective, that argument whenever it suits them to abandon it. Now, when an atheist, and I keep saying atheist or secular person, by the way, so understand that I mean avowed atheists, as well as the average person in society who isn't necessarily settled on the God question, but lives and operates as if there isn't a God. So it's kind of a de facto atheist. I'm calling them all atheists for the sake of this discussion. So anyway, when an atheist tries to argue for objective morality, it seems the argument hinges almost always on utilitarian grounds.
What? What is he talking about? That's not true. I've never heard of. That's very strange. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at, for instance, the Phil paper survey, I don't know what atheist he's talking about. So it could just be like online stuff, like people on YouTube. I don't know exactly what groups he's referring to. So he might be right that at least personally he's encountered a lot of consequentialist realists, but that hasn't been my experience. It's pretty mixed. If you look at, for instance, the 2020 Phil paper survey at the distribution of normative moral positions among at least professional philosophers, it's about an even split, with like 1/3 virtue ethicists, 1/3 deontologists, 1/3 consequentialists. But keep in mind, utilitarianism is a subset of consequentialism. So it's, it's less than whatever the 30% or so. So 15-20% utilitarians. I don't know what the number would be. It wouldn't surprise me if it was lower than that. So there aren't that many utilitarians among professional philosophers. It's certainly not like a non-existent position, but this seems like a strange claim. I don't know what it's grounded in, but maybe there's some merit to it. I don't really know. We've got Anne here. Hey, what's up? All right. And we've got PKD. I saw you earlier. What's up?
That's almost always what it seems to come down to. Now, there is another theory. There's kind of a Platonic theory of morality as an objective thing that exists in the abstract, just kind of floating out there in the ether.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's theory is basically unintelligible, so I'm not going to focus on it. Then
I agree. Unintelligible. You hear that? Now, I very much doubt that Matt and I agree that these sorts of robust, non-naturalist, secular, realist accounts are unintelligible. I very much doubt we agree for the same reasons. But I love to see it. That's cool. Yeah, that one's unintelligible. Yeah. I'm laughing because it's just so weird when, I'm the only person I know of. I mean, there's a few people that I've run into that agree that like just goes around constantly pushing this idea that, hey, maybe non-naturalist realism is unintelligible, so much so that I literally call it the unintelligibility thesis. And it's just, there's something bizarre and a little disturbing about Matt Walsh saying that he thinks that view is unintelligible. Um, I love it. That's cool. I mean, technically, I'm referring to non-naturalist realism, not necessarily some type of Platonistic view, but there's a lot of affinities there. That's pretty funny. That's cool. I like that. Eric, is there any view in moral philosophy akin to perspectivism in philosophy of science? I don't know. It might not go by any particular name. I'd have to have a better sense of what exactly you have in mind by that. So if you want to elaborate it in the chat, feel free.
Then a third option, of course, is the Darwinian idea of morality as a product of evolution. Humans evolved a moral sense because it helps us live together as people in a cohesive society. But this is still moral relativism. I mean, it's not really objective morality.
What? Yeah, so we evolved a moral sense isn't typically going to get you straight to some type of moral realism. You're going to have some naturalist account. So, like maybe something like Oliver Scott Curry's or Sterelny and Fraser's account of naturalism, or some recent ones that are heavily rooted in evolutionary considerations. Uh, those accounts purport to account for there being stance-independent moral facts. So they're not going to be relativistic accounts. I don't know why he would say that.
Because in this view, morality is no more significant than opposable thumbs. It's just a thing that developed biologically to make.
Well, it not being significant, I think there's something interesting with that, because he's saying, what exactly does he say here?
Moral relativism. I mean, it's not really objective morality. Because in this view, morality is no more significant than opposable thumbs. It's just.
So it's no more significant than opposable thumbs. Well, one, opposable thumbs are very significant. So I don't know. Don't knock opposable thumbs. But here, if he's questioning the significance of the views, whether something is a type of moral realism or not doesn't turn on its significance. It turns on whether moral facts are made true by something other than stances. If they are, you've got a moral realism. And these views do hold that moral facts are made true by something other than stances. So they are moral realist accounts. Now, a standard objection to these sorts of accounts, it's one I myself use, is the triviality objection, that even if there were such facts, they would be trivial. This is part of my trilemma, that all accounts of moral realism are trivial, false, or unintelligible. So he dismisses Platonism as Platonistic moral realism as unintelligible. Cool, I'm on board with that. And then he seems to be implying that these naturalistic accounts would be trivial, which I'm on board with that too. So, I mean, we are some kind of crudely arriving at the same conclusions on these matters, but for very likely very different reasons. Who knows? Maybe he has good instincts on the problems of secular moral realism.
Just a thing that developed biologically to make our lives easier. So we have opposable thumbs, and opposable thumbs are helpful, but nobody would say that we have some kind of obligation to use our thumbs. Nobody would say that. They say, you have your thumbs, it's great you have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly joking about the opposable thumb, but I see his point here. Like, I think the point should be something like, it's a descriptive fact that you have opposable thumbs. It doesn't mean you're obligated to employ them. And if it's a descriptive fact that, like, moral facts are facts about what facilitates cooperation, it doesn't follow that therefore you ought to promote cooperation. I think he's getting at something like that, which would be like some sort of concern about the lack of normative authority in naturalist accounts of moral realism, which, if so, I actually agree with him about this.
Nobody says you must use your thumbs.
See,
you have to use
them.
Yet morality is all about obligation. It's all about ought. You ought to do such and such. You ought not do such and such. That's what morality is all about.
Okay, so Platonic accounts are wrong because they're unintelligible, and the naturalistic accounts are wrong because they don't give you normativity, and that's something that morality is all about. I hate to say it, but I actually agree with him about those objections. It's awkward, but whatever. Hey, if he's right about something, I'll say so. I don't think we're getting a particularly philosophically sophisticated account of why he thinks this, but I mean, what did he started the video off by saying, look, I'm not a philosopher. I'm not an expert on this stuff. So, I don't think that we should be too demanding. I don't have a huge problem with his critiques of secular philosophy. Of course, there's not a lot of meat to them, but okay. All right. Koopa says, is there supposed to be something particularly compelling about moral realism that people like? Just knowing that standards you'd like to enforce go beyond yourself. I don't know. It's something I really want to get from realists, is why they care about this so much, like why it matters to them whether realism is true, because it really does seem to matter. Realists seem to care a whole lot, and I don't get it. I think it's weird. All right. Okay, that's it for now.
So an evolved morality might partly explain how we got to this point without completely annihilating ourselves. only partially annihilating ourselves. But it doesn't explain why in the world I should actually act according to it now. That's what it doesn't explain. So evolved morality explains how we got here, but now that we're here, it doesn't explain why I should actually abide by this thing, any more than explains why I would have some sort of obligation to use my thumbs throughout the day. What if I don't want to use them? I won't use them. So that leaves us with the third option for atheists, something like what Sam Harris argues for. He says that morality is basically that which brings about human flourishing, a morally right act.
So atheists are going to have a lot more options than what he's presenting here. So I think he's look, as much as I hate to say it, I think he's shortchanging the kinds of positions and moves available to secular moral realists. They have a lot more options than Sam Harris, Platonism, or whatever kind of Darwinian naturalism he's alluding to here.
Action is an action that brings the greatest good, to the greatest number of people. I was listening to a debate with a moral philosopher, teaches philosophy at Yale, I believe, Shelley Kagan. And he defined morality very simply as this. He said, morally wrong action is action that hurts someone or fails to help them. And morally right action is action that helps someone or refrains from hurting them. Now, I think this definition works pretty well with Sam Harris's definition. And I think they both fail to provide any basis at all for objective morality. And here's why. First of all, to Kagan's point, it's true that it hurts someone when I steal their car. But the question is not whether a thing hurts someone. The question is, why should I care that I hurt someone? Why shouldn't I hurt someone? So you haven't gotten to the ought, but you have to get to the ought because that's the whole point. Second, to Harris's point, it's true that slavery does not lead to the human flourishing of slaves, but why should I care about the slaves? And who says that slaves are supposed to flourish? And take the United States in the early 19th century. Most citizens of the country weren't slaves. What if it could have been argued that slavery helped the greatest number in that environment flourish? Wouldn't that make it morally right by this standard? On the atheistic view, why in the world should the greatest number sacrifice their own comfort for the sake of the minority? But so often in practice, that is what morality requires. That's often when morality, comes into focus and comes most into play, is when a person in a position of power has to make a sacrifice for someone who doesn't have power, or when the majority has to sacrifice for the minority. That's really when you get to, that's when moral claims are the most relevant. But it seems like on the atheistic view, there's just no scenario where that should ever happen. Third, it seems that in order to establish an objective moral standard for human beings, you have to first establish that human beings themselves possess some kind of moral worth or moral value themselves. So the only way to argue that I shouldn't steal, kill, enslave, etc., is to first argue that the people who would be hurt by such actions have themselves moral worth. And unless you're a radical vegan or environmentalist, you have to argue that they have more moral worth than, say, a squirrel or a cockroach. If we can agree that it's a greater evil to kill a child than a cockroach, you have to explain what actually makes the child more valuable objectively. Not just what makes him more valuable to me, but what makes him objectively more valuable. So that even if I didn't recognize his moral worth, he would still have it. So you have to explain what makes him more valuable, what makes life in general valuable, and then what creates this kind of hierarchy.
It's rare that I go this long without having much to respond to. It makes me anxious. Normally it's like 5 hours for 5 minutes of video. So, but I just don't have anything to say at this point.
It seems that atheist arguments for morality, all of them sort of start by assuming the moral value of human beings without explaining how they arrived at that assumption.
They're going to have arguments like that suffering is bad, that people have rights. They're going to make all sorts of appeals. So they don't have to have assumptions. And also, what does he mean by assumption here? So if they're starting with some sort of intuitions or something like that, okay, but then if you have a problem with that, then you're going to have to raise the standard sorts of objections I might raise against those sorts of claims. But he's not doing that.
Seems to me that if human beings are only a random assemblage of matter, then they have no claim, no objective claim to being any more important than any other kind of matter.
Yeah. So, okay, it seems to him that way. Okay, but it doesn't seem to other people that way. So, sorry, it doesn't seem to other people to be that way. So, just because something seems to him to be a certain way doesn't privilege how things seem to him relative to how they seem to others. Why should we take how things seem to him to have any priority over how they seem to people that think, oh, yeah, it seems like people. And keep in mind, quite a few of the people in question are not naturalists. They don't think consciousness is just reducible to physical stuff. So he seems to be thinking that atheists are all physicalists and materialists or whatever. They're all some sort of reductionist, and they're just not.
In the atheistic view, we are all tiny little clumps of stuff wandering around.
Yeah, so that is not the atheist view. That is a view many atheists may have, but it's not the atheist view. I don't. Why do Christians? Why can they not distinguish between atheism and physicalism and naturalism? These are different positions. I wish they would draw the distinction, because it's distracting to have someone just not draw accurate distinctions, and it's quite frustrating. It's like if I refused to draw any distinction between Christian and theist, and then I kept critiquing, like, I don't know, people that were like Hindu or Muslim or something, and conflating that with criticisms of Christians. Christians would go, but that's not my view. That's not my view. And if I was just like, blah, who cares? It's why be sloppy about this? Atheism and physicalism are different things. If you want to criticize physicalists, do it. But stop conflating physicalism with atheism. It's really frustrating.
On a tiny speck called Earth, which itself is hurtling through the endless abyss of space, and soon in the blink of an eye, from the cosmic view, we're going to fade back into the nothingness from whence we came. So, if that's the case, you would have a hard time convincing me that my own life matters, but someone else's?
I mean, one, I would just say it doesn't seem difficult for me to think about things mattering as an anti-realist, much less a naturalist realist. Again, though, it's hard to convince him. So what's the implication? That naturalist realists don't have an account? They don't have an argument? He's not really engaging with these positions in any sustained or serious way. It just seems like he's just incredulous people think differently than he does. And then he's like, well, this view is wrong. I think differently. This view is wrong. I think differently. We're not seeing arguments here. We're not seeing substantive objections here. We're seeing claims. Some of the claims I agree with. Most of them I don't. But he's not arguing. He's not presenting reasons for someone to agree with him. And that's frustrating to listen to. I mean, he's 15 minutes in. I don't know if he's presented a single argument for anything.
Why?
So it's a lot of questions. And look, there's nothing wrong with asking questions, but like, did he go on to talk to people that have different views than him about the matter? I mean, what's the point in asking the questions if you don't actually think there's any, like, are these rhetorical questions? Because if he's sincerely asking the questions, maybe he should reach out and talk to people that have positions on these matters.
Like that, they're going to be gone anyway. And if I could zoom out and see the Earth, from another solar system, none of us would matter at all. We're all just little ants. We're all just little ants on this little ball that's spinning around in space. Who cares?
Well, I care.
Why should I care about them?
I mean, I don't understand the question. Why should you care? Maybe you shouldn't. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't make sense to ask whether you should or shouldn't. You do or you don't. I care. And that's good enough for me.
And again, from the cosmic standpoint, soon enough, the entire Earth itself will be.
Yeah, but so what though? So let's say the Earth is going to get destroyed in 1 billion years. So my family doesn't matter to me? What the hell? I mean, what do people that are moral realists or Christians that think in the way he's thinking here, how do they think about this stuff? Like, what if they became an atheist? Would they stop caring about their family? I don't think that they would. So if you became an atheist and a moral anti-realist, would you just go, well, I guess my family doesn't matter? Why would you come to that conclusion? That's very weird. I think most of them would conclude, oh, well, my family matters to me. Yeah, and that's good enough.
Destroyed. So why does it matter? Now, you can point out that I do care about other people's lives, even though I'm saying all of this. You can point out that life is easier for all of us most of the time if we act like we care about other people's lives. But you haven't explained why I have some sort of objective duty to care about other people.
He says, you haven't explained. Who is he referring to? Because if he's talking about secular realists, they have papers arguing for this. Is he engaging with those papers? Doesn't look like it. So it's a little weird to say you haven't explained. Who hasn't explained?
Because a duty, by definition, is something given to us, assigned to us, right? That's what a duty is.
I mean, if this is supposed to be some sort of analytic claim about the meaning of a duty, like duties have to be given by like an entity or an agent, a secular realist is just going to go, no, they don't have to be, or that's not what I mean by the term duty. And I still think we have stance independent or objective duties and obligations that are not given to us by anyone. So they would just disagree on the analysis of the meaning of the term.
Which is why anytime anyone says to you, do this or don't do that, you always have the instinct to respond, says who? Anytime someone tells you not to do something or to do something, you always want to know by what authority are they telling you that. So the question to atheists, again, when it comes to morality is, says who? Fourth point, Kagan, in that same debate, he grapples with this question. He says that, well, if every commandment needs a commander, if every requirement needs a requirer, then the commander and the requirer would to kill, rape, steal, etc., because we all say so. That's what makes it wrong. It is the consensus of a civilized.
Does Kagan argue for that? I thought Kagan's a realist. It would sound like some kind of constructivist view.
Society. But there's an obvious and very significant problem here. If morality is decided by democratic consensus, on what basis can we condemn historical slavery, considering that almost everyone in the world for thousands of years thought that slavery was fine? In fact, how can the minority, I go back to this point again, how can the minority ever make...
Jonah says Kagan is a contractualist. Is he a relativist?
a moral criticism of the majority if morality is decided by majority consensus? How can a person ever claim that something
majority consensus would be very different from thinking that there are certain preconditions that need to be met in order to have like a just society, and there's facts about what those conditions need to be? And does he think it's just a matter of crude consensus? I don't know. I'd have to go look at his views. I don't know his views on the matter. I don't remember.
Most people do, or most people support, is wrong. How could you go to a fundamentalist Muslim country and say that it's wrong to execute homosexuals when everyone there thinks it's right? Fifth point, every atheistic system of morality that I've ever encountered seems to completely ignore the moral implications of our private actions and our private thoughts. And this isn't a point that I hear even Christians when they're arguing this, about objective morality and everything. I don't often hear them bring this point up. I mean, everything I've said so far, you get William Lane Craig or someone like that has already made these points way better than I've made them. So it's like you don't even need to listen to anything I've just said. Just listen to him. But now this next part, unless I missed it, I don't often hear this point brought up. So maybe it's a bad argument.
Yeah. So, right. So if you're talking about something similar to Rawls, Jonah says, Kagan thinks moral facts are counterfactual about what rational people with full info would assent to, very similar to Rawls. So Rawls is going to put people behind a veil of ignorance, and he's going to say a just society is the society that has the set of conditions that people would agree to if they didn't know who they were in the society, that sort of thing. So there's going to be some sort of like set of conditions that need to be met in order for us to construct the principles of a just society. And it's not just going to be like arbitrary whims or whatever people within a society happen to agree to. So Rawls doesn't think that. So I don't know why Kagan would think that either. So this doesn't seem like a particularly accurate reflection of those sorts of views, if in fact that's an accurate characterization of what Kagan thinks, something like that. Jonah says some people call such Rawlsian contractualism realism, but I wouldn't. I don't know. Did Rawls say he's a realist or not? What does Kagan say? I don't know what they say.
That I'm about to make, but to me, it's just something I think about, and I haven't heard atheists really address it, so I'm going to go with it. So you have the issue of private actions and private thoughts. Okay, if morality is only what helps people, and immorality is only what hurts people, well, again, you haven't explained why I should care about hurting or helping people, or why people are worth helping, or why they're so valuable that I shouldn't hurt them. But even putting all that aside, what about the private and interior lives of people? What about everything that goes on inside me? Is all of that outside of the moral framework entirely? Is it completely morally irrelevant what I think? Now, you may say that it is. Okay, well, let's take some extreme examples. Extreme, though not at all, you know, fantastical. So, take for instance a person who indulges in rape fantasies in his head
Yeah, I'm not going to engage with that.
and enjoys because you are filled with child porn. Instinctively say that he's any material support to it whatsoever, or a woman who sits around all those thoughts. But on what basis? It's not hurting anyone. And atheistic morality seems always, I mean, there's a million versions of it, but it always basically comes down to don't hurt people. Sixth point, you might try to argue that it isn't wrong to indulge in hateful thoughts or violent thoughts or pedophilic thoughts.
Yeah, man.
Why would a person you anyway? And people or any other atheist definition of the term, then how in the world and why in the world did guilt for thoughts ever arise? Doesn't hurt anyone, doesn't affect society.
He wants guilt doesn't affect society. What is he talking about? So guilt, it's like you can think of it as a type of self-punishment that discourages people from performing actions and the behavior. Of course, it affects society. It's complete nonsense to think that guilt doesn't affect society. I think I'm done with this video. I think I don't know that there's much more to review here.
That they will instinctively say that the person who indulges in hateful thoughts, all that,
I mean, it's not meta-ethics.
tears down the moral law. He can as a thing that says that slavery is material world.
Yeah. I'm not seeing meta-ethics there. Okay, so I'm done with that. All right, everyone, finished up with that. I guess if I want to do another stream, I'd start a new video, but I'm fine with doing a fairly short one and stopping after an hour. Surfer Earth says, a professor of mine was a student of Rawls. Wow, when was that? He claims he was interpersonally a de facto Wittgensteinian. What? A Wittgensteinian what sense? Mason says, well, I don't think Walsh should be opposed to thought crime. Jonah, and this is regarding the Rawls thing. I don't know either, but given that on their accounts, moral facts depend on the stance of the people, albeit counterfactual people, they seem to align with anti-realism. Yeah, that's why they sound like, from that description, they would sound like constructivists, and I would classify that as a type of anti-realist. So if that's the view, I would agree with you. I would just, I'd have to go stop and read up and figure out what they think to figure out if I think that they're realist or anti-realist. I'm not going to go do that now. Eric says, thanks, first time viewer, now a subscriber. Oh, well, great. Thank you very much. I just hit 2K, so you're joining good company. Surf on Earth, and this is in reference to Rawls being a Wittgensteinian in the sense of being suspicious of meta-ethical inquiry in general. Okay. Koopa, do relativists actually have a hard time of giving an account for thoughts as moral actions? No, not really. Or anti-realists, I suppose. No. Yeah, because your thoughts will impact what you potentially do, and they could care about what you do. But of course, they could arbitrarily moralize anything they want. There's no like rules against what you can moralize, including thoughts. So no, relativists and anti-realists don't have a problem with this. Okay, I think that wraps up that video. I'll call it there. It's a short one, but that's okay. They don't have to be super, super prolonged. All right, everybody. Thanks everybody for being here. This seemed like a pretty chill stream. It wasn't as fiery as some of the others. I might be back. Probably won't. Probably get to bed early. All right, everybody. Take care. Like the video, subscribe, leave a comment in the comment section, do all the regular stuff, share the video around, all that sort of thing. Take care. See y'all later.